Marcus Thorne believed in a world of clear hierarchies. There were sharks and there were minnows, lions and lambs, architects and occupants. He, of course, was an architect, of deals, of careers, of his own magnificent life. His wife Ilara was an occupant, a lovely one to be sure, with her quiet grace and gentle hands, but she lived within the world he had built. She managed the home he paid for, raised the son he had sired, and provided the soft, stable backdrop against which his own brilliant career could shine. She was, in his estimation, a beautiful, simple, and utterly dependent creature. This belief was the foundation of his world, and it was this belief that allowed him to stand in the sun-drenched living room of their immaculate home, the scent of lemon polish and fresh linen in the air, and dismantle their 17-year marriage with the casual cruelty of a man swatting a fly. "It's over, Ilara," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth she had once mistaken for love. It was crisp, efficient, the voice he used to close a hostile takeover. "I'm leaving." Ilara stood by the grand piano she rarely played, her fingers resting on the polished wood. She didn't cry or scream, she simply watched him, her deep blue eyes holding an unnerving stillness. "I see," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Is it Chloe?" The question, direct and devoid of hysteria, momentarily threw him. He had expected tears, accusations, pleading. Her composure was irritating. "That's not your concern," he snapped, then immediately regretted the defensive tone. He recalibrated, draping himself in an air of weary magnanimity. "Chloe understands me. She understands my world. She has ambition, a drive. We connect on a professional level." He left the rest unsaid, the implication hanging in the air between them. "Unlike you." "She's your secretary," Ilara stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. "She is a brilliant, ambitious woman who is currently my executive assistant," he corrected, his lips thinning. "And she is going to be my partner, in every sense of the word." He looked around the room, at the tasteful art on the walls, the plush designer furniture, the carefully curated life he was now discarding. "Don't worry, I'll be fair. I'll make sure you and Leo are taken care of. You won't have to change your lifestyle too drastically." He thought he was being generous. He thought he was the powerful man dictating terms to the powerless woman. He saw her as the homemaker, the mother, the wife, roles that, in his mind, were defined by their relationship to him. He did not see the woman who had spent years building an empire in silence, an empire so vast and intricate that his own lauded career was but a minor subsidiary within it. He was leaving a woman he believed was a dependent. He had no idea he was abandoning the unseen queen of the very chessboard he thought he commanded. Within 3 months, his entire world would be dismantled, not by a hostile takeover, but by a quiet, irrefutable truth he had been too arrogant to ever see. This is a story about the difference between perceived power and actual strength. It's a story about what happens when arrogance blinds a man so completely that he throws away a diamond, believing it to be common glass. We've all seen people underestimated, haven't we? Maybe you've even been that person. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel. Now, stick with us as we watch a man who thought he was a king discover he was merely a pawn in his wife's masterful game. The genesis of Marcus's delusion had been cultivated for years, watered by his own ego and tended by the sycophantic praise of his family, particularly his mother, Eleanor. 6 months before he announced his departure, the family had gathered for his father's 70th birthday at a Michelin-starred restaurant that dripped with crystal and hushed reverence. The air was thick with the scent of truffles and self-congratulation. Marcus, holding court at the head of the table, had just closed a significant merger for his firm, Innovate Dynamics. "It was about seeing the leverage points no one else did," he explained, swirling a deep red burgundy in his glass. "You have to be able to see the whole board, not just the piece in front of you." Eleanor, a woman whose diamonds seemed to sparkle with the reflected light of her son's success, beamed at him. "You always could, my darling. Even as a boy. Such a strategic mind." Her gaze then slid to Alara, who was quietly listening, a small, polite smile on her face. The fondness in Eleanor's expression curdled into something akin to pity. "It must be so fascinating for you to hear about Alara, like a little glimpse into a different world." "It is," Ilara had agreed, her smile never wavering. "Marcus is very good at explaining complex things in a simple way." Marcus had laughed, a booming, self-satisfied sound. He took it as a compliment to his communication skills, not the subtle barb it was. He reached over and patted Ilara's hand. "My Ilara keeps the home fires burning so I can go out and slay the dragons. It's the perfect partnership." Eleanor had sighed dramatically. "It is, of course, but I do sometimes worry. What would you do without him, Ilara? You have your charity work, which is sweet, but in this day and age, a woman needs something of her own." The irony was a mountain so vast, its peak was lost in the clouds. Ilara sat at that table, a woman who commanded a multi-billion-dollar private holding company with interests in technology, real estate, and next-generation logistics, and listened to her mother-in-law fret about her lack of purpose. She nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, Eleanor. It's important to have something of your own." Marcus had squeezed her hand again, a gesture of patronizing affection. He thought she was agreeing with his mother's assessment of her vulnerability. He thought she was acknowledging her dependence on him. He had no inkling that the something she owned was not just a small business or a personal project, but the very company, Innovate Dynamics, that he considered the entire universe. His firm was a recent and relatively minor acquisition of her holding company, Aethelred Holdings, a silent, formidable entity whose name was known only in the highest echelons of global finance. He was a dragon slayer, all right, a dragon slayer who had no idea he was employed by the dragon. That evening, as they drove home in the sleek German sedan he was so proud of, he had turned to her and said, "Don't mind Mother. She means well. I'll always take care of you. You don't need to worry about a thing." Ilara had simply looked out the window at the glittering city lights, a city she owned a significant portion of, and replied, "I know, Marcus. I'm not worried at all." The day after he left, a profound silence settled over the house. It wasn't the peaceful silence she was used to when Marcus was at work and their 10-year-old son Leo was at school. It was a hollow, echoing void where 17 years of shared life had been. The scent of his expensive cologne no longer lingered in the master suite. The heavy tread of his footsteps was gone. Ilara walked through the rooms, touching the spines of books, straightening a picture frame. She was not grieving the man he had become, but the man she thought he was, the young, ambitious partner she had married, whose dreams she had quietly funded from the very beginning. Her inheritance had come early, a tragic result of a plane crash that had taken both of her visionary, tech pioneer parents. They had left her not just wealth, but a portfolio of investments and a philosophy. Stay quiet, stay private, and let your results speak for themselves. She had honored their legacy, growing their initial fortune into an empire while living a life of deliberate simplicity. She had fallen in love with Marcus, a bright, charming MBA student who knew her only as a woman with a modest trust fund, enough to be comfortable but not enough to be intimidating. She had wanted to be loved for herself, not for her balance sheet, and for a time, she believed she was. She had propped him up from the shadows, using her anonymous holding company to invest in the ventures he joined, creating opportunities he thought he had earned through sheer brilliance. She had engineered his rise, a silent goddess shaping the destiny of her chosen mortal. She thought that by building him up, she was building their life together. Instead, she had built a monster of ego, a man who had flown so high he had forgotten the ground he came from, and the person who had given him wings. Later that day, Marcus called, not to see how she was, but to discuss logistics. "Ilara, I'll have my lawyer send over a preliminary separation agreement, he said, his tone brisk. It's very generous. It outlines the settlement, alimony, and child support. I based it on my salary, and it's more than fair. Your salary, she repeated, her voice neutral. Yes, I'm the sole earner, so it's straightforward. It will allow you to stay in the house for a year, to give you time to find something more appropriate for your new circumstances. More appropriate. A smaller world for a smaller person. And after a year? She asked, a clinical curiosity in her voice. Well, we'll sell the house. The equity will be split, of course, but a large portion will need to go towards my new living arrangements. A man in my position needs to project a certain image. He coughed. Chloe and I will be looking for a suitable place. He was discussing the division of assets with the woman from whom all those assets had ultimately flowed. He was offering her a fraction of her own money and calling it generosity. The absurdity was so profound it was almost comical. I understand, she said. Send the papers, Marcus. I'll look them over. He seemed relieved by her placidity. Good. I knew you'd be sensible. This is for the best, Elara. You'll see. You'll be free to, I don't know, take up pottery or something. And I'll be with someone who truly gets it. After she hung up, Elara walked not to the living room to weep, but down a short, quiet hallway to a room at the back of the house. To Marcus, it was her hobby room. He had glanced in once or twice, seen a desk, a comfortable chair, and some bookshelves, and dismissed it. He never noticed that the door was solid core oak with a high-security biometric lock that she disabled whenever he was home. He never noticed the walls were soundproofed, or that the unassuming art on the wall concealed a bank of monitors. She placed her palm on a small, discreet panel beside the door. A soft click echoed in the silent hall, and the door swung inward. Inside, the room was not a hobby space, but a command center. She sat at the polished obsidian desk and woke the system with a single keystroke. One of the screens glowed to life, displaying encrypted market data. Another showed secure video conferencing software. She ignored them for a moment, pulling a heavy object from a locked drawer. It was a portfolio, bound in simple, unadorned black leather. It looked like something a student might carry. There was no name, no logo. To Marcus, it would have been invisible. But inside were the foundational documents of Aethelred Holdings. The original charter, the articles of incorporation, the irrefutable paper trail of ownership that traced everything back to one name, Elara Vance. Her maiden name, a name Marcus had almost forgotten. She ran her fingers over the smooth leather. This was her symbolic object, the physical manifestation of her hidden life. It was her power, her truth, her history. For 17 years, she had kept it hidden to protect her love. Now, she would use it to protect herself and her son. She opened a secure line. A man's face appeared on the screen, sharp, intelligent, with kind eyes behind expensive glasses. This was Julian Sterling, the public-facing CEO of Aethelred, her most trusted advisor, and the man who ran the day-to-day operations of her empire. Elara, he said, his voice warm but concerned. I heard. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Julian, she said, her composure absolute. But we have work to do. I want a full, deep-dive forensic audit of Innovate Dynamics. I want to know everything Marcus Thorne has been doing, his expenses, his communications, his side projects, everything. And I want you to pull the personnel file on an employee named Chloe Denton. Julian's expression hardened. Consider it done. What's the timeline? Elara looked at the leather portfolio on her desk. The timeline, she said softly, is his arrogance, and I suspect it will be very, very short. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in humiliation, orchestrated by Marcus with the gleeful cruelty of a schoolyard bully who had just discovered a new victim. He seemed to take a perverse pleasure in demonstrating how thoroughly he had moved on, how much better his new life was. He posted pictures on social media of him and Chloe, their arms wrapped around each other at expensive restaurants, their faces beaming. The captions were nauseatingly effusive. "Finally with a woman who matches my ambition," and "the power of a true partnership." He knew Alara would see them. He was counting on it. The most calculated blow came 4 weeks after he left. It was the annual fundraising gala for the Children's Hospital, a charity Alara had passionately supported for years. She was on the board, and the event was, in many ways, hers. She had always attended with Marcus, who treated it as a networking opportunity, a necessary chore. This year she went with a friend, another board member. She held her head high, dressed in an elegant sapphire gown, moving through the ballroom with her customary grace. Then she saw him. He was standing by the champagne fountain, and clinging to his arm was Chloe. She was poured into a glittering, fire-engine red dress that was both expensive and desperately loud. They were laughing, holding court with a small group of people from his firm. As Alara watched, Marcus's eyes met hers across the room. A slow, smug smile spread across his face. He then leaned down and deliberately kissed Chloe, a long, performative kiss designed to be seen. It was a territorial marking, a public declaration of his victory. Later, he engineered an accidental encounter near the silent auction tables. "Ilara, fancy seeing you here," he said, his voice oozing false charm. "You know Chloe, of course." Chloe gave her a tight, triumphant smile. "It's so wonderful to see you out and about, Alara. You're looking, well." The single word was delivered with the precision of a stiletto. "I'm on the board, Chloe. I'm always here," Alara replied, her voice even. She looked at Marcus. "This is an important night for the hospital. I trust you'll be making your usual generous donation." Marcus scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Oh, you know, money is a bit tight with the divorce proceedings. Setting up a new life, you know how it is." He winked at Chloe. "Have to prioritize my investments." The message was clear. His new life with Chloe was the priority. The charity, her charity, was not. He was cutting her down with 1,000 tiny cuts, each one designed to remind her of her diminished status. He was painting her as the discarded, pathetic wife, while he and his new partner ascended to a higher plane of existence. His mother, Eleanor, was a willing accomplice in this campaign. She hosted a Sunday brunch a week later, insisting Alara bring Leo for the boy's sake. It was a trap. Marcus was there with Chloe. Eleanor fawned over Chloe, complimenting her dress, her hair, her sharp business sense. She treated Alara with a cloying, condescending pity that was far more insulting than open hostility. "Ilara, dear, you must be so lonely in that big house," she said, loud enough for everyone on the patio to hear. "Perhaps you should think about getting a little job, just something to keep you busy. A bookshop, maybe? You always like to read." Marcus chuckled into his mimosa. "Now, Mother, don't rush her. She needs time to adjust." Ilara watched her son Leo, who was sitting quietly, his face tight with a tension no 10-year-old should have to bear. He was watching his father laugh with this new woman, his grandmother praise her, while his own mother was treated like a pitiable fool. That was the one cut that truly hurt, the one that solidified her resolve. She excused herself, saying she needed to make a call. She walked into the quiet study of her former in-law's house, the scent of old leather and furniture polish filling her senses. She pulled out her phone and stepped onto the small adjoining balcony, closing the glass door behind her. "Julian," she said, her voice low and cold. "I have the preliminary audit," he said without preamble. "It's worse than we thought. He's been reckless. He's using his Innovate Dynamics corporate card for personal expenses with his new partner. Dinners, hotels, even jewelry. He's classified them as client entertainment. He's also been exploring a side project, a consulting gig, using company resources and proprietary data. It's a flagrant breach of his employment contract and his fiduciary duty to the company." Ilara closed her eyes, a cold fury building within her. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the arrogance, the sloppiness. He believed he was so untouchable that he didn't even need to cover his tracks. He was stealing from her. He was using her own company's money to finance his affair and humiliate her. "And the personnel file on Chloe Denton?" she asked. "Her performance reviews have been mediocre until 6 months ago, when they suddenly became glowing, all signed by Marcus Thorne. He fast-tracked her for 3 promotions in the last quarter against HR recommendations. He's been building a narrative of her being a rising star, but the data doesn't support it. She's competent, but not exceptional." Of course, he wasn't just having an affair. He was trying to rewrite reality to justify it, to elevate his secretary into a peer. "Thank you, Julian," Ilara said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Continue the audit. I want it complete, comprehensive, and ready to be deployed. I want every receipt, every email, every login record. Build the file. I'll let you know when to execute." "And the divorce papers he sent?" Julian asked. "Oh, I have them," Ilara said, a hint of steel in her voice. "They are quite illuminating. He's offering me a pittance based on his salary." She paused, looking through the glass at the brunch party. Marcus had his arm around Chloe, laughing at something his mother said. They looked so confident, so secure in their new world order. "He's about to find out his salary is a rounding error in my finances." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing down her dress. She put on a placid, serene mask and walked back out onto the patio, back into the lion's den. She smiled at her son, a genuine, reassuring smile that was just for him. He looked relieved, his small shoulders relaxing just a fraction. She would endure this. She would endure all of it. Patience was a form of power, and her patience was about to pay dividends. Marcus was busy celebrating a battle he thought he'd won, never realizing he was standing on a battlefield of her choosing, and she was about to command the board. The illusion of Marcus's ascent continued its spectacular trajectory. 2 months after the disastrous brunch, he received the promotion he had been coveting for years. Senior Vice President of Global Strategy at Innovate Dynamics. The announcement was made in a company-wide email praising his visionary leadership and unparalleled success in driving key acquisitions. To Marcus, it was the ultimate vindication. It was proof that shedding the dead weight of his domestic life had unleashed his true potential. He called Ilara to gloat, thinly veiled as a discussion about the divorce. "I just wanted to let you know I've been promoted," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It comes with a significant salary increase, of course. I'll have my lawyer amend the settlement offer. I'm a generous man, Ilara. I want to make sure you're comfortable." "Congratulations, Marcus. That's wonderful news for you," she said, her voice perfectly placid. She was sitting in her home office, the completed forensic audit of his activities open on one of her monitors. It was a multi-hundred-page document detailing a level of corporate malfeasance that was breathtaking in its audacity. "It's wonderful news for Chloe, too," he continued, unable to help himself. "She's being promoted to my chief of staff. We're a team, you see, a real power couple. This is what it's like when your partner is on your level." Ilara listened to him weave his fantasy, a tapestry of self-deceit. He was so caught up in the narrative of his own genius that he was blind to the storm gathering just over the horizon. He genuinely believed his success was his own. He had no idea that his promotion had been subtly approved by Ilara herself, through Julian. It was a strategic decision. The higher he climbed, the more visible he became, and the more devastating his inevitable fall would be. She was giving him just enough rope, not to hang himself, but to construct his own pedestal so she could kick it out from under him. A week later, the amended divorce papers arrived via courier. They were even more insulting than the first draft. The offer had increased, but it was still a pittance relative to their marital assets. Assets he had no idea were almost entirely hers. The document was filled with language that painted him as the magnanimous benefactor and her as the fortunate recipient of his goodwill. It included a clause requiring her to vacate the house within 90 days of the signature. It also included a non-disclosure agreement of startling breadth, preventing her from ever speaking publicly about him or his career. He wasn't just divorcing her, he was trying to erase her, to silence her history as his wife and partner. He followed up with a text message. "My lawyer says it's a standard agreement. Just sign it, Alara. Let's not drag this out and make it ugly. It's the best deal you're going to get." The quiet before the storm descended. For 2 weeks, Alara did not respond. Marcus grew agitated. He sent more texts, then emails, his tone shifting from smug confidence to irritation. "Are you having your lawyer review it? What's the delay?" And then, "Ilara, I'm trying to be civil. Don't force my hand. I can and will play hardball if you make this difficult." He mistook her silence for weakness, for the indecision of a scared woman with no options. He imagined her crying to her friends, scrambling to find a lawyer she couldn't afford, terrified of the future he had thrust upon her. In reality, Elara was spending those 2 weeks in a state of meticulous, cold preparation. She spent hours on secure calls with Julian and her legal team, not a small-town divorce lawyer, but the ruthless corporate attorneys who handled Ethelred's multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. They weren't just planning a divorce strategy, they were planning a corporate decapitation. They finalized the audit. They prepared termination agreements. They drafted internal and external communications. They mapped out every contingency. During this time, Alara's focus was absolute. She maintained a calm and stable environment for Leo, helping him with his homework, taking him to the park, surrounding him with a bubble of normalcy while the world outside that bubble was being prepared for a seismic shock. Her moments of quiet were not moments of fear, but of intense concentration. She would sit in the garden, the late afternoon sun on her face, her eyes closed. She wasn't meditating, she was rehearsing. She was walking through the coming confrontation in her mind, planning every word, every gesture, every deliberate pause. She was steeling herself for the final, necessary act of a war she had never wanted to fight. Finally, when every piece was in place, she acted. She didn't call her lawyer or his. She sent Marcus a single, simple text message. "Marcus, you're right. We should talk. Face to face. Let's resolve this. Can you meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m.? He replied almost instantly. "Of course, my office. I'll book the main boardroom." His office. The main boardroom at Innovate Dynamics. The heart of his new kingdom. He couldn't have chosen a more symbolic venue if she had asked him to. He thought he was summoning her to his seat of power to witness her final surrender. He had no idea he was arranging the stage for his own public execution. The quiet was over. The storm was about to break. The main boardroom at Innovate Dynamics was a cathedral of corporate power. It occupied a corner of the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline. A massive polished mahogany table, long enough to seat 30, dominated the space. It was a room designed to intimidate, to reinforce the importance of the people who sat within it. Marcus, standing at the head of the table looking out at his domain, felt a surge of triumphant pride. This was his world, and into this world, Ilara was about to come, hat in hand, to accept the terms of her defeat. He had arranged everything for maximum psychological impact. He had told his new chief of staff, Chloe, to be the one to bring them coffee. He wanted Ilara to see her, in her element, professional and essential, serving them. A subtle yet brutal demonstration of the new order. At precisely 10 a.m., the heavy glass door swung open. Ilara entered. Marcus had braced himself for a woman who looked worn down, anxious, perhaps even tear-streaked. The woman who walked in was none of those things. She was the epitome of calm composure. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue dress. Her hair was styled in a sleek, elegant chignon, and her only accessory was a slim, black leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She didn't look like a woman coming to beg. She looked like a woman coming to chair a meeting. The sight of her, so poised and self-possessed, was a minor irritant. "Ilara, glad you could make it," he said, his voice a little too loud in the cavernous room. "You have a beautiful view, Marcus," she said, her gaze sweeping across the skyline before settling on him. Her eyes were unreadable. "One of the perks," he said, gesturing for her to sit at the far end of the table, a deliberate choice to put as much distance between them as possible. She ignored the gesture and chose a chair near the middle, directly across from him, forcing a proximity he didn't want. She placed the black leather portfolio on the table in front of her fingers resting lightly on it. The door opened again and Chloe entered, carrying a silver tray with a coffee service. She flashed Marcus a brilliant smile before turning to Ilara, her expression shifting to one of polite, professional condescension. "Ilara, coffee? Black, 2 sugars if I remember correctly?" she asked, a subtle way of saying, "I know your old domestic habits." "No, thank you, Chloe," Ilara said, her voice pleasant but firm. "That will be all." The dismissal was quiet, but absolute. It was the tone of a superior speaking to a subordinate. Chloe's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She shot a confused look at Marcus, who gave a slight shake of his head, and she retreated, leaving the door slightly ajar, as he had instructed. "All right, Ilara," Marcus began, leaning back in his high-backed leather chair, steepling his fingers. "I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable. Let's just sign the papers and get on with our lives. It's the best thing for everyone, especially Leo." "I do want to resolve this, Marcus," she said, her voice calm and measured. "But first, I think we need to have a conversation you've been avoiding for 17 years. He sighed, a show of exaggerated patience. "Ilara, please don't start with the emotional post-mortem. My decision is made. I'm happy. I'm with a woman who is my equal." "Your equal?" Ilara tilted her head, a gesture of genuine curiosity. "Tell me, what makes her your equal? Her ambition? Her drive?" She used his own words, and they sounded hollow and foolish in the quiet room. "Yes, exactly," he said defensively. "She understands the pressures of my position. She contributes." "What did you ever contribute, Ilara? You arranged flowers. You planned dinner parties. You spent my money." "The money you earned," she stated, her voice flat. "Yes, the money I earned, through my own sweat, my own brilliance, working my way up in a cutthroat world." "You believe that, don't you?" she said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of profound, sad fact. "You truly believe you are a self-made man?" "I am a self-made man," he boomed, his frustration finally breaking through his veneer of cool control. "I built this office, this title, this life, while you were, what, reading novels and doing charity work?" Ilara's gaze did not waver. She let his words hang in the air, let the echo of his arrogance fill the space between them. Then she began her list of grievances. It was not a shouting match. It was a quiet, methodical dissection. "On April 12, 2008, she began, her voice soft but carrying an edge of steel, "you came home after being passed over for a promotion at your first firm. You told me you felt like a failure. You said your boss didn't see your potential. The next morning I made a call. Your boss's largest client, a company you never knew was connected to me, threatened to pull their account unless a rising star in your department was given a key role on their project. You got that role. You called it your lucky break." Marcus stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. "What are you talking about?" She continued, ignoring him. "In 2014, the startup you had joined was on the verge of bankruptcy. You were about to lose everything. Then, out of nowhere, a silent venture capital firm from Europe swept in with a Series A funding round that saved the company. The firm was called Aethelred Ventures. You thought it was a miracle. You never thought to ask about the name." The air in the room was growing thick. The view of the city seemed to dim. "And then there's this company, Marcus. Innovate Dynamics," she said, gesturing vaguely at the room around them. "A solid mid-tier tech firm with good potential. You were so excited to join as a vice president. 6 months ago, it was acquired in a quiet, all-cash deal by a larger entity, a private holding company that prefers to remain in the background." She paused, her eyes locked on his. The verbal chess match was over. This was checkmate. "A company," she continued slowly, "that allows its subsidiaries to operate with considerable autonomy as long as their leadership performs and behaves with integrity." Marcus was pale. A cold dread, slick and oily, was beginning to pool in his stomach. He was a shark, a man who understood leverage, and he could suddenly feel the leverage in the room shifting in a way he could not comprehend. "What is this, Alara?" he whispered, his bravado gone, replaced by a raw, naked confusion. "What are you trying to say?" Ilara didn't answer him directly. Instead, she slid her hands over the simple black leather portfolio that had been sitting on the table between them. With a calm, deliberate motion, she unclasped it. The quiet click echoed in the silent boardroom like a gunshot. "You asked me what I contributed, Marcus," she said, her voice no longer soft, but resonant with a power he had never heard before. "You see me as a homemaker, a simple woman who spent your money. You believe your success is all your own. You have built a world on that belief." She reached into the portfolio and pulled out a single, thick document bound in blue cardstock. She didn't slide it across the table. She held it. "The problem with a world built on a lie," she continued, "is that it's fundamentally unstable. It can't bear weight. It's a house of cards, and a single breath of truth can bring it all down." Marcus stared at the document, then back at her face. The woman he thought he knew was gone. In her place was a stranger, a formidable, unnerving presence whose stillness was more terrifying than any rage. "What are you doing, Ilara? Is this some kind of game? If you think you can blackmail me..." "Blackmail?" A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "Oh, Marcus, you still don't understand. You see this as a marital dispute, a fight over alimony and assets." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes boring into his. "But you and I are not having a marital dispute. We are having a corporate performance review, and yours, I'm afraid, is long overdue." Her words made no sense. Corporate performance review? She was his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife. She had nothing to do with his work. "You talked about your world," she said. "Innovate Dynamics, this office, your title. Let's talk about my world instead." She placed the blue-bound document on the table. The cover read in simple block letters, "Ethelred Holdings, Articles of Incorporation." Ethelred, Marcus breathed, the name she had mentioned earlier, the venture capital firm. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. "What is that?" "Ethelred Holdings is a private global investment firm with a controlling interest in 172 companies across 9 sectors, Ilara said, her voice as clear and precise as a financial statement. "Its portfolio includes technology, sustainable energy, pharmaceuticals, and, as of 7 months ago, a promising mid-sized company called Innovate Dynamics." The blood drained from Marcus's face. He felt cold, numb. His mind was struggling to process the impossible logic of her words. "No," he stammered. That's not possible. Our parent company is run by a board in Geneva. The CEO is Julian Sterling." He knew Sterling. He had met the man twice. A silver-haired, impeccably dressed titan of industry who commanded a room with his quiet authority. The idea of Ilara, his Ilara, being connected to a man like that was ludicrous. "Julian Sterling is a very talented man," Ilara agreed smoothly. "He is the CEO of Ethelred Holdings. He is also my employee. He reports directly to me." Marcus just stared, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. "You see, Marcus," she said, her voice softening into a tone of almost clinical pity, "Ethelred was my father's nickname for me when I was a child. It means noble counsel. When my parents died, they left me their company. I was its sole inheritor. I have spent the last 20 years growing it, quietly, from the background. I am the board. I am the sole, silent owner of Ethelred Holdings." She let the statement land. Simple, devastating, final. The beautiful panoramic view from the window suddenly seemed menacing, the city a dizzying abyss. The polished mahogany table felt like a coffin lid. His entire career, his promotion, the very office in which he sat, it was all hers. The money he had been spending so freely was her money. The company he was using to leverage a better divorce settlement from her was a company she owned. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw the layers he had never bothered to notice. The quiet was not emptiness, it was observation. The stillness was not passivity, it was control. The simplicity was not a lack of sophistication, it was a deliberate choice, a camouflage. He had been married to a queen and had treated her like a servant. "No," he croaked, shaking his head in frantic denial. "You're lying. This is a trick, some kind of sick joke." As if on cue, the boardroom door swung open. It was not Chloe this time. A tall, silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped inside. He had an air of absolute, unshakable authority. It was Julian Sterling. Marcus's heart stopped. Sterling, the CEO of the parent company, was here, in his boardroom. Sterling's eyes, however, were not on Marcus. They were fixed on Alara. He walked to her side, his expression one of deep, professional respect. He placed a thin file on the table next to her leather portfolio. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice calm and resonant. He used her maiden name. "The final audit is complete, as you requested. We also have the termination papers ready for your signature." Ms. Vance. The name echoed in the silent room, a death knell for the world Marcus Thorne had built. He looked from Sterling's deferential face to Alara's composed one. The truth, in all its terrible, catastrophic immensity, crashed down upon him. It was real. All of it. He had not just underestimated his wife. He had been living in a fiction of her creation. He wasn't a king. He wasn't even a knight or a bishop. He was a pawn, and he had just been swept from the board. The silence in the room stretched for an eternity. Marcus's mind, usually so quick and strategic, was a maelstrom of denial and terror. He felt as if the floor had dropped away, leaving him in a freefall. He stared at Alara, this woman who was suddenly a complete and terrifying stranger, the mother of his child, the woman he had discarded like an old coat. "Alara, I don't understand," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. His voice was a thin, reedy thing he didn't recognize. Ilara's expression was unreadable. It was not triumphant or smug. It was something far more chilling, indifferent. It was the look of a CEO reviewing a failed asset. "It's quite simple, Marcus," she said, her voice retaining its cool, even tenor. "For 17 years, you have been a beneficiary of my work, my legacy, and my capital. You have built a career and a sense of self-worth on a foundation you never knew existed. And in return, you have treated me with escalating contempt." Julian Sterling cleared his throat softly. "Ms. Vance, if I may." He opened the file he had brought and addressed Marcus, though his words were clearly for Alara's benefit. "Marcus Thorne, the forensic audit has uncovered significant financial misconduct, specifically the misappropriation of company funds for personal use totaling over $150,000 in the last 6 months, classified as client entertainment and other fraudulent expense claims." Marcus flinched as if struck. The dinners with Chloe, the weekend trips, the jewelry. He had been so arrogant, so certain of his untouchable status. Furthermore, Sterling continued, his voice like chipping ice, we have evidence of the use of proprietary company data and resources for an unauthorized external consulting project, a direct violation of your employment contract's non-compete and intellectual property clauses. These actions constitute a gross breach of your fiduciary duty to this company and its owner. Owner, the word hung in the air, aimed at Marcus like a poisoned dart. Ilara, please, he began, his tone shifting from confusion to desperate pleading. He turned his full attention to her, ignoring Sterling. This was about them, wasn't it? A husband and a wife. We can talk about this. This is a mistake, a misunderstanding. Was it a misunderstanding when you told me I contributed nothing? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Was it a misunderstanding when you and your mother mocked my lack of a career? Was it a misunderstanding when you kissed your secretary in front of me at my own charity event, a public spectacle designed to humiliate me? He had no answer. Her list of grievances, once just words, now felt like physical blows. This isn't about our marriage anymore, Marcus, she said, finally picking up a pen. You ended that. This is about the consequences of your actions. She uncapped the pen and signed the top document in the file Sterling had brought. Your employment with Innovate Dynamics and any and all affiliated entities of Aethelred Holdings is terminated, effective immediately. No! The word was torn from him, a raw cry of disbelief. You can't. My career, my reputation, everything I've built. You built nothing, she said, the first flicker of cold anger showing in her eyes. You were given everything, and you were so blinded by your own ego you couldn't see the gift. You saw it as your due. She signed another page. Chloe Denton's employment is also terminated for collusion in the misappropriation of company funds and for receiving promotions under false pretenses, creating a clear conflict of interest. Outside the boardroom, Chloe, who had been listening with her ear pressed to the glass door, gasped. Her face, which had been a mask of smug curiosity, crumpled in horror. Her ticket to the top had just been punched, but it was for a one-way trip to the bottom. Marcus pushed his chair back, a wild, cornered look in his eyes. Ilara, think about Leo. What will this do to him, to our family? I am thinking about Leo, she retorted, her voice sharp for the first time. I am showing him that integrity matters. I am showing him that you do not treat people, especially the people you claim to love, with disrespect and cruelty. I am protecting his future and his mother's dignity. You are the one who didn't think about Leo when you chose to behave this way. Sterling stepped forward. Security is on their way to escort you from the premises, Mr. Thorne. You will be allowed to collect your personal belongings from your desk under supervision. Your corporate accounts and access have already been revoked. The finality was absolute. Marcus slumped in his chair, a broken man. The architect of his own magnificent life had just discovered his blueprints were a fraud, and his foundation was sand. He looked at Ilara, at the quiet strength in her face, the unyielding resolve in her eyes, and he finally understood. He had not been a lion. He had been a pampered house cat, and he had just been thrown out into the jungle. Please, he whispered, the last dregs of his pride evaporating. Don't do this. Ilara stood up, her composure perfectly restored. She picked up her black leather portfolio. It's already done, Marcus, she said, looking down at him not with hatred, but with a profound and sorrowful finality. You did this. She turned and walked towards the door, Julian Sterling following a respectful step behind her. She didn't look back. The show was over. The aftermath was swift and brutal. 2 uniformed security guards, men who had nodded respectfully to Marcus just that morning, entered the boardroom. Their faces were impassive. Mr. Thorne, if you'll come with us, one of them said, his voice polite but unyielding. The Mr. Thorne was clipped, stripped of the deference it had carried an hour before. The walk from the top-floor boardroom to his office was the longest walk of Marcus's life. It was a walk of shame, conducted under the curious, shocked, and sometimes satisfied gazes of the employees he had managed. The news was already spreading through the office grapevine like wildfire. Whispers followed him down the hallway. He could feel hundreds of eyes on his back. He, who had thrived on being the center of attention, now found it to be a form of exquisite torture. When they reached his office, Chloe was there, frantically throwing things into a cardboard box. Her makeup was streaked with tears, her face a mask of panic and fury. "You!" she hissed at him the moment he entered. "You did this! You told me she was nobody, a simple housewife." "I thought she was," Marcus mumbled, his mind still reeling. He felt detached, as if he were watching a movie of someone else's life falling apart. "You thought?" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking. "You ruined me. I left a stable job for you. I tied my career to yours, and you didn't even know who your own wife was." Her ambition, the quality he had so admired, had curdled into a venomous, self-serving rage. She saw him not as a partner, but as a failed investment, a bad bet that had cost her everything. "We can fix this," he said, the words sounding hollow even to himself. "Fix this? Are you insane?" She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "She owns the whole company. We're finished. I'm finished." She sealed the box with a violent rip of packing tape. "Don't call me. Don't ever contact me again." She shoved past him and the security guards, dragging her box of failed dreams behind her. The power couple was officially dissolved. Marcus was given 10 minutes. He numbly packed a few personal items into a box. A photo of Leo, a framed award, a pen set he'd been given. Objects that had once been symbols of his success now felt like relics from a buried civilization. As the guards escorted him to the elevator, he passed by the wide-eyed faces of his former team. No one would meet his eye. He had been excommunicated. He was deposited onto the curb outside the gleaming skyscraper, his small box of personal effects at his feet. The city traffic rushed by. People bustled past him, important people going to important meetings. He was no longer one of them. He was just a man in an expensive suit, standing on a sidewalk, holding a cardboard box, with nowhere to go. His first call was to his mother. He stumbled through the story, his voice choked with a mixture of rage and self-pity. He tried to spin it, to paint Elara as a vindictive, deceitful monster. "She was hiding it all along, Mom. She was playing me for a fool for 17 years. Eleanor was silent on the other end of the line for a long time. Marcus expected outrage on his behalf, a tirade against Elara's treachery. But when she finally spoke, her voice was faint, shaken. "She owns Innovate Dynamics? She owns the whole parent company," he yelled into the phone. "She owns everything." The implications were slowly dawning on Eleanor. Her entire perception of the family hierarchy had been upended. The daughter-in-law she had pitied, the woman she had condescendingly advised to get a hobby, was one of the most powerful people she had ever indirectly known. All her little slights, her patronizing comments, her fawning over Chloe, they all came rushing back to her, recontextualized not as the wisdom of a superior, but as the ignorant blathering of a fool. Worse, she had hitched her wagon to the wrong horse. She had championed Marcus's affair, alienating the woman who now held her son's fate, and by extension, the family's reputation, in the palm of her hand. Most importantly, she had jeopardized her relationship with her grandson, Leo. "Marcus," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "what have you done?" It was not the question he wanted to hear. "What have I done? What has she done? She destroyed me." "She gave you a career, you idiot." Eleanor's voice suddenly sharpened, fear making her cruel. "From what you're telling me, she gave you everything you ever had, and you threw it in her face. You humiliated her. You flaunted your little secretary in front of her. What did you think would happen?" The conversation deteriorated from there. Eleanor was panicking, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, how to build a bridge back to Alara for Leo's sake. Marcus, steeped in his own victimhood, could only see betrayal. He hung up on his own mother, feeling more alone than ever before. He went to the bank, hoping to draw on his substantial savings and investment accounts. An automated message informed him that his accounts were frozen, pending a review related to the ongoing corporate legal action. Of course, Ilara, or rather Ms. Vance, would be meticulous. Her legal team would have moved to freeze any assets potentially commingled with the funds he had misappropriated. The money he had thought was his, a product of his salary and bonuses, was now trapped in a legal web of her making. He was a man without a job, without a reputation, without access to his money, and without his mistress. He had flown too close to the sun, but the sun had not been a distant, impersonal star. It had been his wife, and he had mistaken her warmth for weakness, her light for his own reflection. Now she had withdrawn her light, and he was left in the cold and the dark, with nothing but the ashes of his own arrogance. 3 months passed. The seasons began to turn, the crispness of autumn yielding to the first chill of winter. The world moved on, but for Marcus, time had frozen on the day his life had imploded. The fallout had been catastrophic and complete. The story of the high-flying SVP, fired for cause by his secretly powerful ex-wife, became a quiet legend in financial circles. It was never reported in the press. Alara, true to her nature, kept it private, but the whispers were enough. No reputable firm would touch him. His name was toxic. He had been forced to sell his sports car and move into a small, bleak apartment in a distant suburb. The man who had once commanded boardrooms now spent his days sending out resumes for mid-level management positions in entirely different industries, jobs he considered beneath him. Most went unanswered. The few interviews he landed ended abruptly when the conversation turned to his departure from Innovate Dynamics. Ilara, meanwhile, had stepped gracefully out of the shadows. After the incident, Aethelred Holdings had issued a press release announcing a leadership transition. Julian Sterling would be moving to a chairman role, and Ms. Ilara Vance, the firm's founder and sole proprietor, would be taking on the public-facing role of CEO. The announcement was accompanied by a stunning photo of Ilara, the same one from her corporate ID, poised, intelligent, and undeniably powerful. The financial world was abuzz with the emergence of this new, unknown titan. Her life and Leo's had found a new, calmer rhythm. The cavernous house no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. Ilara was more present than ever, managing her global empire from her home command center with seamless efficiency, but always making time to pick Leo up from school, to help with his science projects, to simply be his mother. The tension that had coiled in Leo's small shoulders during the last months of his parents' marriage had vanished. He was thriving, secure in the unwavering love and stability of his mother. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Marcus called Ilara. His voice was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out resignation. He wanted to see Leo. Ilara agreed. She had never intended to keep his son from him, but the meeting would be on her terms. "We can meet at the public library near your apartment," she said, "tomorrow at 2. The library was a neutral, public space. It was also a humbling one. When Marcus arrived looking thin and tired in clothes that seemed a size too big for him, he saw Ilara and Leo sitting at a table in the children's section, reading a book together. Ilara looked up as he approached. She wasn't smiling, but her expression was not hostile. It was neutral, calm. "Dad!" Leo's face lit up and he ran to hug his father. Marcus knelt and held his son tightly, a lump forming in his throat. It was the first genuine, uncomplicated moment of affection he had experienced in months. He spent an hour with Leo, helping him find books on dinosaurs and space travel. Ilara sat at a nearby table, ostensibly reading a magazine, giving them space but remaining a quiet, watchful presence. During that hour, Marcus watched her. He saw the easy, loving way she interacted with their son. He saw the patience in her eyes. He saw the woman he had thrown away, and for the first time, he began to see a glimmer of what he had truly lost. It wasn't the money or the status, it was her quiet strength, her unwavering partnership, the love she had given him that he had been too foolish to value. As he was leaving, he paused by her table. "Thank you, Alara," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "He's your son, Marcus," she replied simply. "He needs his father. Just be a good one." His mother, Eleanor, had also been on a journey of her own. After their initial, panicked phone call, she had spent weeks in a state of horrified reflection. She saw how her own obsession with status had fueled her son's worst instincts. She saw how her dismissive treatment of Alara had contributed to the disaster. Filled with a shame that was new to her, she wrote Alara a letter. It was not a plea for forgiveness or an attempt to regain favor. It was a simple, heartfelt apology. She apologized for her snobbery, for her unkindness, for her blindness. She asked for nothing in return, only stating her hope that one day she could prove herself worthy of being a grandmother to Leo again. Ilara, who valued genuine change over empty words, read the letter and felt a flicker of something other than disappointment. It was a start. She replied with a short, polite note, suggesting Eleanor could join her and Leo for ice cream the following week. It was a small opening, a test. Redemption, Alara knew, was not a single event, but a long, difficult process. Her mother-in-law, and perhaps even her ex-husband, were just taking the very first tentative steps on that long road. The final chapter of the saga closed not with a bang, but with the quiet turning of a page. A year after the confrontation, Marcus was working as an assistant manager at a large home improvement store. He wore a bright orange apron and helped people find the right kind of screws and lumber. It was honest work, humbling work. He was slowly, painfully, rebuilding his life from the ground up, no longer as an architect, but as a simple laborer. He saw Leo every other weekend. Their meetings were awkward at first, but gradually found a rhythm. He was learning to be a father without the trappings of wealth and power. He was learning to be just a man. He and Alara spoke rarely, and only about their son. The chasm between their worlds was too vast to ever be bridged again. But a fragile thread of civility remained, woven for Leo's sake. Chloe had vanished, as Alara knew she would. A woman who attaches herself to power cannot survive without it. Rumor had it she had moved to a different city, trying to start over, her reputation as tarnished as Marcus's. Ilara sat in her office, the same room that had once been her secret sanctuary and was now simply her workspace. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On her screen was the quarterly report for Aethelred Holdings. The numbers were good. The company was thriving. Her empire was secure. But her sense of satisfaction came not from the numbers, but from the peace in her home. It came from the sound of Leo's laughter in the garden below. She had not sought revenge. She had sought justice. She had protected what was hers, her son, her dignity, and the legacy her parents had entrusted to her. She had been forced to tear down the world she had built for her husband, but in its place she had built a better, more honest world for herself and her child. Her story was a testament to a simple, profound truth. True worth is not found in titles or salaries or the applause of the crowd. It is found in integrity, in quiet strength, in the courage to be true to oneself, even when the world refuses to see you. Marcus had been so obsessed with appearances that he had missed the reality right in front of him. He had looked at his wife and seen an occupant, never realizing she was the architect of it all. He had abandoned her and their son for a life he thought was bigger and brighter, only to discover he had left the sun to chase a fleeting reflection in a puddle. The world is full of people who are underestimated, whose quietness is mistaken for weakness, and whose kindness is mistaken for naivete. But strength, true strength, doesn't always need to announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits, patient and powerful, for the moment it is needed most. What do you think? Was Alara's response justified, or was it too harsh? We all face moments where we have to stand up for ourselves, and it's never easy. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you found this story compelling and want to see more tales of justice and vindication, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and remember to always look beyond the surface. You never know what hidden power you might find.